Right, with the debate on AstraZeneca firing up again today, as you just saw, and big business demanding a plan to reopen the borders. To analyse it all, I'm joined from Sydney by the editor-at-large of the Australian newspaper, Mr Paul Kelly. Paul, there's a few elements to this today where we've got the PM told by some he should apologise for the slow rollout, declaring, of course, that he takes responsibility for it. He wants to get it fixed. He's copped flack for admitting that he wants the immunisation regulator ATAGI to have another look at AstraZeneca recommendations. Let's take a listen.
I saw the Prime Minister's comments. They did strike me as unusual, and I just thought it was an unnecessary shot at professionals doing their job. If there's a problem, work through it with them. Don't blame them for doing their job.
You've written today the PM should scrutinise the advice from ATAGI on AstraZeneca, and today Scott Morrison said this is what people elected him as a leader to do. So what happens next?
Well, what happens next is we'll have to see if the medical advice changes, I guess. Certainly the Prime Minister is incredibly frustrated by the medical advice, and coming before we had the Delta variant eruption, there's no doubt that it did grievous damage to the confidence of the community when it came to AstraZeneca. So the consequences of this medical advice have been enormous. Now, clearly, the major problem with the vaccine has been the lack of supply. There's no question about that at all. But the secondary problem has been the medical advice about AstraZeneca, because the resistance to it has been enormous. Scott Morrison has been very frustrated by this for a long period of time. He'd like the medical advice to change. I think it's unsurprising that he's now making these comments in public. Of course, it would be untenable for him to overrule the medical advice. That would be a disaster. It would be untenable. People wouldn't take any notice of it. And I guess the problem now for the medical board, of course, is if they do change their advice, it's going to look as though they've responded to pressure from Morrison.
Oh, look, I have to tell you, I mean, I was in the original target group for AstraZeneca. I have a big network of people. I scour social media. I've been saying for weeks now, I think that AstraZeneca as a brand has its reputation shot. And I know in politics, when people have, made a view, very, very hard to shift that view. Have a look at these numbers. New South Wales mass vaccination hub at Sydney's Olympic Park. These are numbers out of Tuesday. 8,295 doses of Pfizer were administered and just 50 only doses of AstraZeneca. That's the issue, I think, Paul. People have made up their mind. I don't think it matters what the TGA or ATAGI say or the Prime Minister says. We've got 2 more deaths. We heard that there in the news. Victoria and Tasmania linked to AstraZeneca. Pretty hard to move on it, I reckon.
Well, I think that's right, Peter. I mean, there's no doubt that enormous damage has been done. And frankly, I think when we look back on this, we have to severely question the value of that medical advice and put it against the impact that it had. And of course, what's even more relevant now is that the threat from COVID is very different because of the Delta strand today compared with when that medical advice was first given. So I think that's another relevant point. But I mean, just coming back to your argument, I mean, I think you're probably correct. I think the damage done to AstraZeneca may well mean that it's going to be very hard to rehabilitate it. Nonetheless, there will still be people having the vaccine, and it's important that the government and the medical advice continue to make decisions on merit.
I mean, the issue is too, we've spent 18 months putting these medical experts up as absolutely infallible. Their advice keeps changing. It's different state by state, but they're still infallible. And I guess one of the worries that you have with this whole issue about AstraZeneca and ATAGI has said from day one that over, I think it's the age of 18, you can use AstraZeneca. It's just that it's recommended for a particular age cohort, but it's approved and available for everybody else, provided they go through a consent process. But that's got lost in the communication of this issue all the way along.
Well, it has, but I think, frankly, given that that was their advice, they surely would have been aware of the consequences of that advice. And essentially what's happened in Australia is we've now got a high degree of selectivity between the vaccines. So rather than have an approach, let's just go out and get vaccinated, there's this high sense now of discrimination between Pfizer and AstraZeneca. That's been incredibly counterproductive.
Yeah, but hang on. We haven't got 6 deaths in the Pfizer ledger. We've got 6 deaths, according to the TGA, in the AstraZeneca ledger. And I know you can walk down the street, you're more likely to get run over than you'll get to, die from one of these jabs. But it's cold comfort when people look at it like that. I mean, people buy a ticket to win the lotto every week. They're never going to win the lotto. You and I both know that very rarely going to win the lotto, but they still take a pump that they might. That's the problem.
Oh, well, of course. So, I mean, essentially, we've got a situation here where I think the fear of AstraZeneca is to a significant extent irrational. Fine, we can look at the statistics, and the statistics say that you've got a greater risk of being hurt driving home from work tonight than you have from taking AstraZeneca. That is the rational approach, but nonetheless, we don't live in rational times.
No, I think it's a fixed view from the community now, and I would say politically it's very hard to claw it back. Talk to me about business leaders. They've all come out pretty hard saying there needs to be an urgent plan to reopen borders. They're worried about labour shortages. Commonwealth Bank Chair Catherine Livingstone, she's been out there. She says the business is at a crisis point. Very concerned about lockdowns, as we all are. I have to say, Victoria, tonight, this is your 180th night of lockdowns. Business couldn't be clearer, but unfortunately for the PM, the states have got the whip hand here. Where does he go on a plan for borders, and how quickly do you think we can open?
Well, there is a plan. The plan was enunciated by the National Cabinet 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's a 4-stage plan. And at the end of last week, the Prime Minister recommitted to that plan. And he's also indicated that the work from the Doherty Institute, the modelling from Doherty, will be finalised by the end of this month. Now, what's going to happen here is that there will be thresholds of vaccination coverage identified and put up in lights. And those thresholds will determine the capacity of the country to move from 1 stage to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4. So that's the real debate. That's where business should really be focused. And the question is, what are going to be the thresholds which take us at the end of the year from stage 1 to stage 2? This is really critical because we've got to ensure that the country moves together. And the great fear is that the premiers won't go along with this, that they might sabotage the entire process and exercise the same sort of powers that they've been exercising to this point. Now, that's likely to do a lot of grievous damage because the country, after we've got a large part of the country vaccinated, must be able to move forward. And we must be able to move forward under this coordinated plan based on vaccination thresholds.
Tia, I don't think I'd want to be the PM right now. He has a lot on his plate. Paul Kelly.
He sure does.
Thank you for your time.